When an 18-year-old boy ages out of the foster care system, he inherits a worthless piece of land with a giant hole in it. But what he discovered deep inside that cavern would change not just his life, but the very meaning of the word inheritance. This story is about what happens when you're given nothing and you find everything. And if you've ever felt like you were starting from zero, I want you to stick around. Maybe even hit that subscribe button, because this is a place for stories like ours. The day I turned 18 was the day I legally ceased to exist as a problem for the state of Oregon. There was no party, there was no cake. There was only a thin manila envelope and the signature of Ms. Albright on my release paperwork. She was my caseworker for the last 2 years, a woman whose exhaustion was so profound it seemed to have settled permanently into the lines around her eyes. She slid the envelope across the scratched laminate table of the group home's visitation room, a space that always smelled faintly of bleach and regret. "Leo, this is it," she said, her voice flat, as if she were reading a grocery list. "Your final effects." I looked at the envelope. It wasn't thick enough to hold anything of value. My entire life, the parts that could be contained in paper, fit inside. A birth certificate with my name, Leo Vance, and 2 names I barely remembered. A social security card. A bus ticket to a town called Argent Falls, a place I'd never heard of. And a single, folded, heavily creased legal document. "What's this?" I asked, tapping the document. "That," she said, letting out a sigh that sounded like air leaking from a punctured tire, "is your inheritance." I almost laughed. The word felt ridiculous in this room, in this life. Inheritance was for kids with families, with houses and photo albums and trust funds, not for kids who measured their past in a series of different beds and unfamiliar faces. "From who?" "Your maternal grandfather, Thomas Vance. He passed away about 10 years ago, right before you entered the system. The state was his executor. It's all been in probate, tied up in knots. Honestly, we all thought it would just be absorbed by his debts, but here it is." She pushed it closer. "It's a deed for a piece of property just outside Argent Falls." For a second, a flicker of something wild and impossible lit up in my chest. A property, land, a place that was mine. Maybe a small house, a yard, a foothold in the world. I unfolded the paper. The legal jargon was dense, but I could make out the key phrases. Lot 7, Pike County, 1.8 acres. And then the part that mattered. Assessed value, negligible. Primary feature, 1 large, undeveloped karst cavern entrance. Property is deemed a significant liability and tax burden. My hope deflated as quickly as it had appeared. Records say, "It's just a patch of rocky," records say, "It's just a patch of rocky, unusable land with a big hole on it." Your grandfather was an enthusiast, a caver. He spent all his money on this stuff, left nothing but debt, I'm afraid. She leaned forward, her expression shifting from tired bureaucracy to something resembling pity. "Listen, Leo. There's a standing offer from a development company, a quarrying outfit. It's not much, $5,000. After the back taxes are paid, you'd walk away with maybe $2,000. $2,000. It felt like a fortune and an insult at the same time. Enough to find a room somewhere for a couple of months, maybe. Enough to delay homelessness. They just want to fill it in, level the land for their own use," she added. "It's the smart move. Take the money. Don't get attached to a piece of paper. It's not a home. It's a problem. Sign the transfer papers. I can file them for you, and the money will be in an account by the end of the week." I stared at the deed. It felt heavy, not with value, but with the weight of a life I never knew. My grandfather, a caver, a man who loved a hole in the ground enough to own it. Everyone in my life had been temporary. Everything had been taken away or left behind. This worthless, useless, stupid piece of land was the only thing anyone had ever intentionally left for me. "The bus ticket is for Argent Falls," I said, my voice quiet. "Yes, the property is there. You'd have to go there to sign the papers with the company's local agent anyway, if you want to handle it in person. Or, as I said, I can do it." She wanted me to take the easy way out. The system always wanted you to take the easy way. It was cleaner, less paperwork. I folded the deed and slid it back into the manila envelope. I picked it up, feeling its pathetic weight in my hand. "I think I'll go see it first," I said. Ms. Albright just nodded, a flicker of something I couldn't read in her eyes. Maybe it was disappointment. Maybe it was respect. Or maybe it was just more tiredness. "The bus leaves in an hour," she said, standing up. "Good luck, Leo." And just like that, I was done. I walked out of the gray building that had been my home, my prison, my world for the last 3 years. The door clicked shut behind me, the sound of a period at the end of a long, sad sentence. I had a backpack with 2 changes of clothes, a worn copy of a book I'd read a dozen times, the manila envelope, and a bus ticket to a hole in the ground. It wasn't a beginning. It felt like just another kind of ending. I didn't know then that my grandfather hadn't left me a liability. He had left me a map. He had left me a choice. And he had left me a story that I was now, finally, old enough to read. The bus ride was a long, slow crawl out of the city and into the green heart of Oregon. For the first hour, the window was just a smear of familiar strip malls and gray suburbs, the landscape of my contained life. Then came the forests, thick and deep, the pines so dense they seemed to drink the sunlight. The bus was mostly empty, just a few other solitary travelers lost in their own worlds, their faces illuminated by the pale glow of their phones. I didn't have a phone. I had the window. I watched the miles of trees scroll by, and for the first time in years, I felt the sheer, terrifying scale of the world outside the system. I was a ghost haunting my own life, and now the door had been opened, and I was being forced out into the sun. Argent Falls wasn't a destination. It was a place the bus passed through. The driver, a heavy man with a kind, weathered face, called it out as we approached. "Argent Falls, next stop. Anyone for Argent Falls?" I was the only one who stood up. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror, a brief flicker of surprise. "Town's not much," he said as I grabbed my backpack from the overhead rack. "Hope you're not planning on staying long." "Just visiting," I mumbled. He pulled over at a spot on the side of the highway marked by a faded wooden sign that read, "Welcome to Argent Falls, population 412. There was no station. There was just the sign, a gravel shoulder, and a 2-lane road that disappeared into the trees. I stepped off the bus, and the silence hit me first. Not true silence, but the absence of city noise. The air was filled with the hum of insects, the rustle of wind in the high branches, and the distant caw of a crow. The bus pulled away with a hiss of its air brakes, leaving me in a cloud of diesel fumes that quickly vanished into the clean, pine-scented air. I was alone, utterly and completely alone. I looked at the road leading into town. It looked like a tunnel carved through the forest. I checked the directions Ms. Albright had scribbled on a sticky note. The county tax office was on Main Street. The law office of the development company's agent was 2 doors down. Everything was arranged for a clean, quick transaction. Sell the problem, take the cash, and disappear. That was the plan. The smart plan. I hitched my backpack higher on my shoulder and started walking. The town of Argent Falls was a study in gentle decay. Main Street was a short collection of single-story buildings with faded paint and dusty windows. There was a general store with a rust-stained tin roof, a diner with a flickering neon sign that read, "Eat," and a gas station with pumps so old they looked like museum pieces. A few people, mostly older men in flannel shirts and worn jeans, watched me walk by from the porch of the store. Their gazes weren't hostile, just curious. I was new. I was a disruption to the slow, predictable rhythm of their day. I found the tax office easily. It was part of a small municipal building that also housed the sheriff's office and a one-room library. The woman behind the counter was named Brenda. Her name tag said so. She had a cascade of gray hair pinned up in a complicated bun and looked at me over the top of her reading glasses. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone suggesting she doubted it. I slid the deed onto the counter. "I'm here about this, Leo Vance." Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly. She knew the name. She took the deed and her fingers, surprisingly nimble, danced across a keyboard. A monitor hummed. "Vance," she muttered. "Lot 7. Thomas Vance's old property." She looked back at me. "You're his grandson?" I just nodded. "Well, I'll be," she said, though she didn't sound pleased. "There's the matter of the outstanding taxes. 10 years' worth. It comes to $3,112.41. She said the number with a certain grim satisfaction. $3,000, more than half the buyout offer. Ms. Albright had been optimistic. "I was told there was an offer on the property," I said, my voice feeling thin. "From a development company." "Oh, there's always an offer from Sterling Minerals," she said, a hint of disdain in her voice. "They've been trying to get that land since before your granddaddy passed. Their agent, Mr. Davies, is just 2 doors down. He'll be happy to see you. It'll clear the debt." She handed the deed back to me. It felt even heavier now. A debt, not an inheritance, a debt. I walked out into the pale afternoon light, the weight of it all pressing down on me. I stood on the cracked sidewalk, looking at the sign for Davies and Croft, attorneys at law. This was the moment, the end of the line. I could walk in there, sign a paper, and walk out with enough money to be someone else's problem in another town for a few months. It was the logical thing to do. It was the only thing to do, but I couldn't shake the image of my grandfather, a man I couldn't remember, who thought a hole in the ground was worth holding on to, worth going into debt for. What did he see in it? I turned away from the lawyer's office and walked into the general store. An old man behind the counter looked up from his newspaper. "Help you?" he asked. "I need a ride," I said. "Out to the old Vance property." The man lowered his paper. He looked me up and down, his gaze lingering on the backpack. "You family?" "His grandson," I said. The man grunted. He seemed to be having an internal debate. "Cost you $20, he said finally, "and I'm not waiting around." "I'm not coming back right away," I said. He just shrugged, as if my choices were my own and of no consequence to him, which was true. "Suit yourself," he said, grabbing a set of keys from a hook behind the counter. "Let's go. Don't want to be out on that road after dark." His name was Carl, and his truck smelled of oil and coffee. He didn't talk much on the drive, which I was grateful for. The road quickly turned from pavement to gravel, and then to a deeply rutted dirt track It seemed to be actively trying to reclaim itself for the forest. We bumped and lurched along, branches scraping against the sides of the truck like fingernails on a chalkboard. "Not much out here," Carl said, breaking the silence. "Nope," I agreed. "Your granddad was a strange one," he offered after another minute. "Kept to himself, always messing around with that cave. Said it was important. Most folks just thought he was crazy. My grandfather, a strange, crazy man who loved a cave." "What did he say was important about it?" I asked. Carl shook his head. "Never said. Just that it needed protecting. From folks like Sterling Minerals, mostly. He fought them for years." He pointed through the windshield. "There it is. End of the line." The track ended in a small, overgrown clearing. Ahead of us was a dilapidated barbed wire fence with a rusted sign that read, "Private property, no trespassing." Beyond it, the land was a tangle of brush, rocks, and stunted pine trees. It looked exactly as worthless as I'd imagined. "This is it," Carl said, putting the truck in park. $20. I handed him the bill I'd been clutching in my pocket. He took it without a word. "You sure you don't want me to wait?" he asked, a flicker of something like concern in his voice. "I'm sure," I said, opening the door. I stepped out, and the truck was gone a minute later, its engine noise fading until all I could hear was the wind again. I was standing in front of my inheritance. It was a mess. A forgotten, unloved piece of the world. I found a gap in the fence and slipped through. The ground was uneven, covered in a thick carpet of pine needles that crunched under my boots. I walked for about 50 yards, pushing through scratchy bushes, and then the ground simply fell away. The cavern entrance was bigger than I'd expected. It wasn't just a hole. It was a gaping mouth in the earth, at least 30 feet across, plunging into darkness. The edges were jagged limestone, slick with moss. A cool, damp air rose from it, carrying a scent of wet stone and deep earth, a smell as old as the world. It was intimidating, it was terrifying, and it was mine. Near the edge of the pit, half hidden by a cluster of ferns, was a small, ramshackle shed. Its roof was sagging, and the wood of its walls was weathered to a silver gray, but it was still standing. A padlock on the door was rusted solid. This must have been his, my grandfather's base of operations. I walked over to it, my boots sinking slightly into the soft ground. The air was still and heavy. I felt like an intruder, a trespasser on a memory. I was about to turn away, to head back to the road and hitch a ride back to town and sign the papers, when I saw it. A single, small, brightly colored object tucked into a crack in the shed's foundation. It was a fishing lure, a brightly painted, ridiculous-looking plastic fish with a feathered tail. It was the one thing in this entire landscape of decay that looked new, intentional. My heart started to beat a little faster. It felt like a sign. I knelt down and pulled it out. It wasn't just a lure. Tied to its hook with a piece of fishing line was a small, tarnished brass key. A key for the rusted padlock. It was a test, a breadcrumb. He had left it for someone, for me. A wave of emotion, something between grief and a terrifying, fragile hope, washed over me. For 10 years, this key had been waiting here, waiting for the boy who didn't even know it existed. I took the key, my hand trembling slightly, and walked back to the shed door. The lock was stiff, but after a moment of jiggling and pushing, the key turned. The shackle sprang open with a loud click that echoed in the quiet clearing. I pulled the lock off, took a deep breath, and opened the door. The inside of the shed smelled of dust, oil, and time. It was dark, the only light coming from a single grimy window. As my eyes adjusted, I saw that it wasn't empty. It was a workshop. A workbench ran along one wall, covered in tools, coils of rope, and strange metal gadgets I didn't recognize. Shelves were filled with geological survey maps, books on speleology, and dozens of neatly labeled jars of rock samples. This wasn't the hideout of a crazy person. It was the laboratory of a scientist, a man obsessed. On the center of the workbench, cleared of all other clutter, sat a single object, a heavy, olive-drab, military-style ammunition box. It was closed with two sturdy latches. On top of it, taped to the lid, was a white envelope. My name was written on it in a spidery, unfamiliar hand. Leo. I sank onto a dusty wooden stool, my legs suddenly weak. My backpack slid to the floor. The silence of the shed was absolute. I was miles from anyone, in a place that hadn't been touched in a decade, and I was about to open a message from a dead man. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely tear the envelope open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a letter. The handwriting was the same as on the envelope. I began to read. "My dear Leo," it started. "If you are reading this, then you are 18 and you have found your way here. I am sorry. I am sorry for not being there to give this to you myself. I am sorry for the years you have spent alone. None of this was the plan." I had to stop and take a breath. The words were a physical blow. He knew. He had imagined this moment. He had thought of me. I cried then. Not loud, sobbing cries, but silent, hot tears that tracked paths through the dust on my cheeks. I cried for the grandfather I never got to know. I cried for the boy who grew up in houses that were never homes. I cried for the sheer, lonely weight of the last 10 years. Will tell you. They will say it is worthless, a liability. They will be right, in a way. It will cost you. But it is also a gift and a responsibility. There are things in this world that are worth more than money, Leo. There are things that must be protected. Sterling Minerals wants this land. They have wanted it for a long time. They see only the rock, something to be crushed and sold. They are blind to what lies within. They will offer you money. It will probably seem like a lot. I am asking you to be stronger than they are. The letter went on to describe his work. He wasn't just an amateur caver. He was a self-taught hydrogeologist. He believed the cavern was part of a massive, undiscovered aquifer system, a source of water so pure it was almost a scientific anomaly. He had spent years mapping it, testing it, trying to prove his theory. He wrote about the beauty of the deep places, the silence, the formations that had taken millennia to grow. He wrote with a passion that was so alive, it felt like he was in the room with me. "Inside the ammo box," the letter concluded, "you will find my preliminary research, my maps, and my journals. It is not enough to be legal proof. It is only a beginning. The rest of my work, the core samples and the final water analysis data, is hidden deeper, safer. There is a place inside the cavern, a side chamber I called the scriptorium. You will find it if you follow the map. But a word of warning, the cavern is dangerous. Do not go in unprepared. The ropes and gear in this shed are old. Test them. Trust nothing, and trust no one, especially not Sterling. They are not just greedy, they are ruthless. This is your choice now. You can take their money and walk away. No one would blame you. Or you can finish what I started. You can protect this place. The choice is yours. Whatever you decide, Know that I loved you. Your grandfather, Thomas. I sat there in the dusty silence, the letter trembling in my hands. It was too much. A secret history, a hidden war, a legacy of obsession. The ammo box sat on the bench, a silent challenge. I reached out and unfastened the latches. They sprang open with a metallic clang. Inside, it was packed tight. There were rolled-up maps bound with rubber bands that had grown brittle with age. There were thick, leather-bound journals filled with that same spidery handwriting. And on top of it all was a stack of photographs. I picked them up. They were pictures of the inside of the cavern. In the harsh glare of a headlamp, I saw incredible things. Curtains of stone that looked like frozen waterfalls. Forests of needle-thin stalactites. A pool of water so clear it was almost invisible. And in one photo, a man, smiling. He was older, with a wild mane of white hair and deep-set eyes that crinkled at the corners. He was wearing a helmet and caving gear, covered in mud, but he looked completely, incandescently happy. It was him, Thomas Vance, my grandfather. It was the first time I had ever seen his face. I stared at the photograph until the image blurred. This man had loved me. This man had left me a mission. And I was standing at a crossroads so significant it made my head spin. I could hear Ms. Albright's sensible voice in my head. Take the money, Leo. It's not a home, it's a problem. But then I looked at my grandfather's smiling, muddy face. He wasn't offering me a problem. He was offering me a purpose. This is a moment in the story where everything could have gone a different way. And maybe you've had a moment like that in your life. A choice where the easy path was right there, sensible and safe, and another path was terrifying and uncertain, but it felt right. It felt like yours. If you've ever faced a choice like that, I want you to let me know in the comments. I read every single one. And I think it's important to remember that we're not alone in these moments. The weight of that choice is heavy, and it's good to have a community that understands. Now, let's get back to the shed and the decision I had to make. For a long time, I just sat there. The sun began to dip lower, and the light coming through the grimy window shifted from white to gold. I spread the maps out on the workbench. They were incredibly detailed, hand-drawn with colored pencils and precise, tiny notes. He had named every passage, every chamber, the Grand Gallery, the Chime Hall, Echo River. It was a whole secret world beneath my feet, and he had been its king. His journals were just as meticulous. They were filled with water temperature readings, pH levels, mineral analysis, and sketches of rock formations. But woven in between the scientific data were personal entries. June 10th. Sterling's lawyers sent another letter today. Same threats, different letterhead. They think I'm just a crazy old man. Maybe I am. But I know what's down there. August 3rd. Found a new passage today, behind the calcite falls. The air is different back there, fresher. I think I'm close to the main artery of the system. December 1st. Leo is 4 today. I wish I could show him this place. I wish I could tell him that the world is so much bigger and more wonderful than what we see on the surface. Reading his words felt like a conversation across time. I was getting to know him, his stubbornness, his intelligence, his loneliness, and his love for me, a boy he barely knew but carried in his heart. The thought of selling this, of letting it all be crushed into gravel, felt like a betrayal. Not just of him, but of this version of myself I was just starting to discover. The grandson of a brilliant, stubborn explorer. I spent the rest of the afternoon going through the gear. As his letter warned, much of it was old. The ropes were frayed in places, the metal carabiners pitted with rust. But there was also a newer-looking climbing harness, a good helmet with a headlamp, and a small pack with emergency supplies. He had prepared a kit, a go-bag, waiting. The sun set, and the shed plunged into darkness. I switched on the headlamp, and its bright beam cut a sharp cone through the dust motes dancing in the air. The world shrank to the circle of light. It was time. I was terrified. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to stop. I had no experience. This was insane. But the fear was mixed with something else. A pull. A deep, resonant curiosity. I had to see it. I had to know. I packed the essentials, the harness, the helmet, a spare rope I'd tested and trusted, water, and the maps. I put the journals and photos back in the ammo box and tucked it away under the workbench. Then, with my heart hammering against my ribs, I walked out of the shed and towards the mouth of the cavern. Standing at the edge, I clipped a safety line to a thick, sturdy-looking tree my grandfather had clearly used as an anchor point. The primary descent rope was already in place, disappearing into the blackness. I tested it, putting my full weight on it. It held. My hands were slick with sweat as I clipped my harness into the rappel device. I took one last look at the sky, a deep indigo scattered with the first stars. Then I leaned back over the edge and pushed off. The world disappeared. There was only the rope sliding through my hands, the scrape of my boots against the rock face, and the vast, silent darkness below. The air grew colder, damper. The sound of the wind faded, replaced by a profound, subterranean silence, broken only by the drip, drip, drip of water somewhere in the dark. After about 50 feet, my boots touched down on a wide, sloping ledge. I was in. I unclipped from the rope and swept my headlamp's beam across the space. I was in a massive chamber, the size of a church. The ceiling was lost in the darkness above me. The walls were sculpted into fantastic shapes, flowing and smooth, the work of millions of years of water. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. I pulled out the map. According to my grandfather's drawing, the main passage continued downward from this ledge. But he had marked a small, almost invisible side passage, the entrance to the scriptorium. It was supposed to be hidden behind a formation he'd labeled the Stone Curtain. I scanned the wall with my light, and there it was. A massive sheet of flowstone, a calcite deposit that looked exactly like a petrified waterfall or a giant stage curtain. It was beautiful. I walked over to it, my footsteps echoing in the huge space. The air behind it felt different, just as he'd written, a slight, cool draft. I pushed my way through a narrow gap between the curtain and the cavern wall. The space was tight, scraping my backpack, and then it opened up. I was in another room, much smaller, maybe 20 feet square. And it was not a natural cavern. The walls were lined with sturdy wooden shelves. A makeshift desk and chair, built from scavenged lumber, sat in the center. And on the shelves, protected from the damp by plastic sheeting, were dozens of boxes, files, and core samples. This was it, the scriptorium, his hidden laboratory. It was incredible. He had built a secret world within a secret world. On the desk, just like in the shed, was another envelope with my name on it. This one was sealed with wax, stamped with a simple letter V. My grandfather had a flair for the dramatic. My fingers were numb with cold as I broke the seal. This letter was shorter. Leo, if you've made it this far, you have your grandfather's heart. I am proud of you. I hope you came here not for riches, but for answers. The answer is in the water, but the proof is in the box under the desk. What you do with it will define you. The company knows there is something here. Their early surveys must have shown them the same anomalies I found. But they don't know what it is, and they don't have the data to prove it. I do. Be careful. Be smart. Be brave. Your loving grandfather, Thomas. Under the desk was a heavy-duty Pelican case, the kind used for sensitive scientific equipment. It was locked with a combination lock. My heart sank. A combination? I looked around the room, my light scanning the shelves, the walls. There was no number written down. I went back to the letter. Nothing. I thought about his journals, the dates. December 1st. Leo is 4 today. My birthday. Could it be? It was a long shot, a cliché from a spy movie. But he seemed to be a man who appreciated a bit of theater. My birthday was July 16th. I tried 0716. The lock clicked open. A wave of dizziness washed over me. He knew my birthday. He remembered. I opened the case. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was a laptop computer, an old, ruggedized Panasonic Toughbook. Next to it was a small, sealed vial of crystal-clear water and a binder filled with lab reports from a university geology department. The final piece of the puzzle. I lifted the laptop out. It was heavy, built like a tank. I opened it and pressed the power button. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then the screen flickered to life, bathing the dark chamber in a pale blue light. It booted up to a simple desktop. There was only one folder, labeled The Argent Project. I opened it. It was full of files, spreadsheets, geological models, research papers, and a video file named For Leo. My finger hovered over the trackpad. This was it, the final message. I clicked it. The video opened, and my grandfather's face filled the screen. He was in the scriptorium, sitting at the same desk I was now. Hope the world has been kinder to you than in the photograph. But his eyes were bright, intense. "Hello, Leo," he said, his voice raspy but warm. "I hope this finds you well. I hope the world has been kinder to you than I fear it has." He paused, taking a breath. "I don't have much time. The doctors say it's a matter of months. And Sterling Minerals is getting more aggressive. I had to hide all this, to put my faith in the idea that you would one day be standing right where you are now." He leaned closer to the camera. "The water, Leo. The water in this aquifer is unique. It's been filtered through a specific combination of limestone and volcanic rock for thousands of years. The lab reports in the binder will confirm it. It's medically, scientifically pure. Purer than anything ever recorded. It has applications in medical research, in electronics manufacturing. It's worth more than they could ever dream. Not millions, billions." I stared at the screen, my mind reeling. Billions. Quarry it, which would destroy the aquifer. Quarry it, which would destroy the aquifer forever. They would shatter this place and poison the water without ever knowing what they'd lost. I've spent the last 15 years of my life fighting to stop them. I tried to get it declared a protected site, but my data was incomplete. I was just a crazy old man with a theory. But this, he patted the laptop, this is the proof. The core samples, the long-term analysis, it's all here. His expression grew grim. They tried to get me to sell. When I refused, they tried to intimidate me. Cut off my access road, filed frivolous lawsuits. I have a record of all of it. a separate file on this drive. It's all there, Leo. The evidence of their campaign of harassment. He looked away from the camera for a moment, and when he looked back, his eyes were shining with unshed tears. I wanted to give you a normal life, a house, a college fund, all the things a grandfather should. But all I had was this fight. This is all I can leave you. It's a terrible burden, I know. You can take this data, go to Sterling, and write your own check. They will pay you a fortune to make it all go away. You could be set for life. Or you can finish the fight. You can use this to expose them, to save this place. It won't make you rich. It will make you a target. It's the harder path, but it's the right one. He smiled, a sad, gentle smile. I always believed my grandson would choose the harder path. You have a good heart, Leo. I knew it the day you were born. Whatever you choose, I will be proud of you. Goodbye, my boy. The screen went black. I sat in the echoing silence of the cavern, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating my stunned face. The weight of his words, of his legacy, settled on me like a physical thing. Billions, a secret war, a choice between a life of ease and a life of purpose. I closed the laptop and put it back in its case. I looked at the vial of water. It looked so ordinary, but it was the heart of it all. I stayed down there for hours, reading through the file of his fight with Sterling. The threatening letters, the legal notices, the documented incidents of vandalism and intimidation. It was a chronicle of a lonely, desperate war fought by one old man against a faceless corporation. As dawn approached, I knew I couldn't stay down there forever. I packed the Pelican case into my backpack. It was heavy, heavy with secrets, heavy with responsibility. The climb back up the rope was exhausting. My muscles ached. But as I hauled myself over the edge and back into the misty morning light of the clearing, I felt different. I wasn't the same boy who had repelled into that darkness. The world looked sharper, the colors more vivid. I walked back to the shed, my mind a whirlwind of plans and fears. My first call had to be to Ms. Albright. She was the only person remotely on my side, even if she didn't know it yet. The problem was, I didn't have a phone. I hiked back out to the main road. It took over an hour. My legs felt like lead, but my mind was racing. I stood on the gravel shoulder, the same spot where the bus had dropped me, what felt like a lifetime ago, and waited. Eventually, a pickup truck, even older and rustier than Carl's, rattled to a stop. A woman with a kind, sun-wrinkled face leaned across the passenger seat. "You look like you've been through it," she said. "Need a ride into town?" I nodded, unable to speak. I climbed in, and the Pelican case settled on the seat between us. "Thanks," I managed to say. "Don't mention it," she said, putting the truck in gear. "You one of the Vance family?" News traveled fast in Argent Falls. "His grandson," I said. She nodded slowly. "Your granddad was a good man, stubborn as a mule, but good. Glad to see someone's finally checking in on his place." We drove the rest of the way in a comfortable silence. She dropped me off in front of the general store. I used the payphone outside, a relic I was surprised still worked, to call Ms. Albright's office. I had to reverse the charges. When she finally came on the line, her voice was laced with impatience. "Leo, where are you? Did you sign the papers with Sterling's agent?" "No," I said, my voice tight. "Ms. Albright, you need to listen to me. It's not a worthless hole in the ground. It's complicated." I tried to explain. I told her about the shed, the letters, the hidden lab, the laptop. I probably sounded like a lunatic. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I thought she had hung up. "Ms. Albright?" "I'm here," she said, her voice different now. The bureaucratic flatness was gone, replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. "Leo, where are you right now?" "Outside the general store in Argent Falls." "Don't talk to anyone else," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Don't go near the lawyer's office. Don't, under any circumstances, mention a laptop or a company called Sterling Minerals to anyone. Do you understand?" "Yes," I said, my heart starting to pound. "Okay. I have a friend, a colleague from law school. He does pro bono environmental law. His name is Ben Carter. He's based in Portland, but he has a cabin about an hour from you. I'm going to call him. Stay put. I'll call you back at this number in 30 minutes. The line went dead. I stood there by the payphone, the receiver still pressed to my ear, the world tilting on its axis. This was real. Her reaction made it real. The next 30 minutes were the longest of my life. I bought a bottle of water and a stale granola bar from the store and sat on the curb, my backpack with the precious Pelican case clutched between my knees. Every car that drove by made me jump. I felt exposed, visible, a target, just like my grandfather. The phone rang, shrill and sudden, making me flinch. I snatched it up. "Hello?" "Leo, it's me," Ms. Albright said. "Ben is on his way. He's driving a blue Subaru Forester. He'll meet you at the diner. He'll ask you if you're a friend of Tom's. You say yes. Got it?" A friend of Tom's. Got it. "Leo," she said, and her voice softened for the first time since I'd known her. "Be careful. It sounds like you've stumbled into something big." An hour later, a dusty blue Subaru pulled up in front of the diner. A man got out. He was maybe in his late 30s, with a tired face, a rumpled shirt, and the same look of profound exhaustion I'd seen on Ms. Albright. He walked over to me. "Are you a friend of Tom's?" he asked, his eyes scanning my face. I looked at him, this stranger who was my only hope. I thought of the man in the photograph, the man in the video. Thomas, my grandfather. "Yes," I said, "I am." Ben Carter didn't look like a hero. He looked like a man who had lost too many fights. But as I sat across from him in a booth at the back of the diner and he opened the Pelican case, his entire demeanor changed. The weariness fell away, replaced by an electrifying focus. He booted up the laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He read the lab reports, his eyes widening. He looked at the vial of water as if it were the Holy Grail. "My God," he whispered, looking up at me. "He actually did it. The old man actually did it." He spent the next hour explaining it to me in terms I could understand. He called the aquifer a closed-loop, pristine system, a geological miracle. The purity of the water was off the charts. It was a scientific treasure, but more than that, it was a resource of incalculable value. "Your grandfather wasn't just a caver, Leo," Ben said, his voice filled with awe. "He was a visionary. This is decades ahead of its time." Then he opened the file on Sterling Minerals. As he read through the record of their harassment campaign, his expression hardened into a cold, quiet anger. "This is a pattern," he said. "I've seen this before. They identify a resource on private land, usually owned by someone elderly or vulnerable. They make a low-ball offer, and if it's refused, they begin a war of attrition. Lawsuits, access disputes, intimidation. They bleed their target dry until they have no choice but to sell for pennies on the dollar. But this," he tapped the screen, This is the most complete record of their tactics I've ever seen. Your grandfather built a rock-solid case against them. A waitress came over and refilled our coffee cups. We fell silent until she left. "So what happens now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Ben leaned back in the booth, running a hand through his messy hair. "Now, we have a choice, the same one your grandfather left you. Option A, we take this to Sterling. We use it as leverage. They'll deny everything, but they'll pay. They'll pay a lot. You'd be a very rich young man. They'd make you sign an ironclad NDA, and they would get the land. The aquifer would be destroyed within a year. But you'd be safe, and you'd be rich." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "The easy path, the sensible path. Or," he continued, his eyes locking onto mine, "there's option B. We fight. We use this evidence not to enrich you, but to protect the cavern. We file for an injunction against Sterling. We submit your grandfather's research to the EPA and the state's Environmental Quality Department. We leak the story to the press. We make what they did to your grandfather public. It would be a long, ugly, expensive battle. Sterling has armies of lawyers. We have, well, we have me. And you. And this laptop. We probably won't win a big settlement. The goal wouldn't be to make you rich. It would be to get the land permanently protected, to finish his work." He looked at me, his gaze unflinching. "It's your inheritance, Leo. Your choice. What do you want to do?" I thought about the gray walls of the group home. I thought about the $2,000 that had seemed like a fortune. I thought about a life without worry, without struggle. And then I thought about my grandfather's face in that video. I always believed my grandson would choose the harder path. "He called it the Argent Project," I said quietly. "Let's finish it." A slow smile spread across Ben Carter's tired face. It was the first time I'd seen him smile. "Good," he said. "I was hoping you'd say that. Now, let's get to work." The days that followed were a blur. Ben drove me back to Portland, and I stayed in the spare room of his small apartment, a space filled with stacks of legal books and maps. We spent every waking hour huddled over the laptop. Ben filed for an emergency injunction to stop Sterling from taking any action on the property. He drafted petitions and compiled the evidence. My job was to become an expert on my grandfather's research. I read his journals from cover to cover. I learned about hydrology, about karst topography, about the delicate chemistry of the water. I was no longer just a boy who'd inherited a hole in the ground. I was the custodian of a legacy. A week after we started, Sterling's lawyers responded. They sent Ben a letter. It wasn't a threat. It was an offer. A new one. They offered me $500,000. Cash. All I had to do was sign the deed and turn over everything my grandfather had left me. Ben showed me the letter. "It's their first move," he said. "They're scared. They don't know how much we have. This is them trying to buy our silence." $500,000. The number was so large it was abstract. It could change my life forever. It could buy me a future. But it wouldn't be my future. It would be a future purchased with the destruction of my grandfather's dream. "Tell them no," I said. Ben nodded, a glint of pride in his eye. The next day he leaked the story. He gave it to a well-respected investigative journalist he knew. The story ran on the front page of the state's biggest newspaper. Corporation accused of harassing elderly landowner to steal scientific discovery. It was all there. My grandfather's research, the aquifer, Sterling's campaign of intimidation. My story. The boy from the foster care system fighting to protect his only inheritance. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. Environmental groups rallied to our cause. Donations poured into a legal defense fund Ben set up. The story went national. I was terrified. My face was in the newspaper. Suddenly, everyone knew who I was. Sterling Minerals fought back, of course. They issued a statement calling the allegations baseless, a desperate attempt to extort money. They tried to paint my grandfather as an eccentric crank and me as a troubled, manipulative kid. But the evidence was too strong. The journalist uncovered other cases, other landowners who had been targeted by Sterling. A pattern of predatory behavior began to emerge. The state's attorney general announced an official investigation into the company's business practices. The fight dragged on for months. It was grueling. There were depositions, hearings, endless paperwork. Sterling's lawyers tried every trick in the book to bury us. But we had something they didn't. We had the truth. And we had a story that people connected with. The turning point came when a former geologist for Sterling Minerals, his conscience stirred by the news reports, came forward as a whistleblower. He confirmed that the company's initial surveys had shown the water anomaly, and that his superiors had ordered him to bury the findings. That was the final nail in their coffin. Facing a massive state lawsuit and a PR nightmare, Sterling Minerals finally surrendered. They publicly withdrew their interest in the property. They settled with the state for millions of dollars in fines for their predatory practices. As for me, I didn't get rich. The legal battle ate up most of the defense fund. But we won. The land, the cavern, the aquifer. It was all placed into a protected trust managed by a state university. It would be a site for scientific research, forever safe. My grandfather's Argent project was complete. 6 months after it all ended, I stood once again in the clearing by the shed. It was autumn, and the leaves were turning brilliant shades of red and gold. The air was crisp and cool. The shed was no longer dilapidated. With the help of some volunteers who had been moved by the story, I had fixed it up. It had a new roof, new windows, and a small wood-burning stove. It wasn't big, but it was mine. I had a home. Ben had helped me get a scholarship to the local community college. I was studying environmental science. I spent my weekends at the property, acting as a sort of unofficial caretaker, guiding the university researchers who now came to study my grandfather's cavern. It wasn't an easy life. The money was tight. The scars from my years in the system hadn't just vanished. But for the first time in my life, I had a purpose. I had a connection. I had a story that made sense. I often thought about the choice I'd made. The easy money versus the hard fight. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I had chosen correctly. My inheritance wasn't a worthless cavern or a bank account. It was a lesson. It was the knowledge that some things are worth more than their price tag. That home isn't a place you're given, but a place you fight for. That the most valuable things are the ones you protect, not the ones you sell. My grandfather didn't leave me wealth. He left me something far more important. He left me a choice. And in making it, I found myself. And that's the real story. It's not about finding treasure in a cave. It's about finding out who you are. It's about being handed a story of loss and abandonment and finding a way to rewrite it as a story of purpose and love. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight for something that mattered, I hope you'll consider subscribing. This is a community for people who understand that the hardest paths often lead to the best destinations. Please, share your own stories in the comments below. Tell me about the caverns in your own life, the things that looked worthless on the surface, but held a deeper meaning. I will read them, because every one of our stories deserves to be told.